In this video I'm going to paint the cliffs at North Head here in Sydney Harbour, and you can see that I've changed a fair few things from the actual reference photo that I've worked from. I dropped the foreground completely and I rearranged the cliffs so that it's a bit more of an interesting composition, well, at least in my opinion. And then I've also completely changed the mood and the lighting. It's now late afternoon and the sun's streaming in from the right side of the picture. So you don't have to stick to your reference photo, obviously, or paint exactly what's in front of you. You can take some liberties, and if you want to see other videos and more in-depth tutorials, you can head over to my Patreon page as well. I'd love to see you over there for monthly content that's not on YouTube and also ad-free. Let's get started. Because the sky is a very small area, I don't bother wetting the paper first. I just start painting right away. Raw sienna for the clouds and towards the horizon, and cerulean blue for the sky. And I also dropped in a little bit of red into that sky. But because the light is bouncing off my wet surface, I'm going to prop up my board. Also helps a little bit with the gravity of the paint running down. Drag that cerulean blue straight through my ocean, just so that there is a bit of color harmony happening between the sky and the water. Bit of background on the scene itself. These are cliffs that I visit quite regularly. It's in the northern part of Sydney Harbour. This is called North Head, so it's the left side of the entrance to Sydney Harbour. And on top of those cliffs are wonderful walks and lookouts. This one called Yinningma Lookout, which is the indigenous word for cliff's edge, so very appropriately named, and the views are just stunning. And for many parts of the year you can spot whales passing from north to south, and then a few months later they come back up the coast, and I'm up there probably most weekends for a quick walk. In the meantime, I've covered my main cliff with a mix of raw sienna and a bit of quinacridone gold just to get that warm glow happening, and then dropped in a subtle mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, which is effectively Payne's grey, one way to mix Payne's grey, and it's, you know, one of the fundamental mixes that I use in almost every painting. And generally speaking, this painting is mixed with a very limited palette, so I'm using my base colors. And if this is not your first video that you're watching of my paintings, you would probably know by now I have a reasonably limited palette. In general, I use 2 sets of primary colors for most of my paintings, and maybe this is the year 2025 where I'll add a few colors or swap a few colors out just to get a bit more variation into my color palette. But most of my paintings thus far have been produced with raw sienna, ultramarine blue, and a burnt sienna as my primary triad, red, yellow, and blue. And then I also use cobalt and cerulean blue, mostly for skies. And then I have quinacridone gold as my other yellow, and quinacridone magenta as my primary red. And that's what I achieve most of my landscape paintings with. And flipped the board 90 degrees so that I can get a really straight horizon line. That is very important when you paint seascapes or any kind of water, such as lakes and still water, that your horizon line is dead straight. As soon as there is a slight slant on it, it will look wrong. Our brains are calibrated that water is level, and you know that when you tip a glass and you hold a glass of water at an angle, the water surface is always level. And as I'm coming down the page with my second layer of the ocean on top of that very, very pale first layer, I'm dry brushing around the base of the cliffs because that's where I want some waves to crash. There is like a white border around the base of the cliffs. So I have very little water in my brush, and now I'm just darkening a bit of the ocean color, adding in a touch of yellow to get a tint of green into my blue, just so that it looks a little bit more like ocean color. And just like the first layer, I'm going to go around some of the white caps of the waves and making sure that there is a white border around my base of the cliffs, and then gradually build up the values of the ocean water. As you can see, my brush movements are very loose. I'm holding the brush halfway up towards the back end of my brush handle, just that I have a lot of freedom in those movements to create the wave texture. Time to do some more work on the cliffs themselves. I'm re-wetting the one in the back first, just to drop in a few more shadows and enhancing the contrast between the edge of the cliff in the foreground and the one in the back, because that edge of that first cliff will turn out to be my main focal point of the painting, so I want to enhance the contrast there as much as I can. And for the same reason, I'm now strengthening the shadow on the left hand side leading into the painting, just so that we have maximum contrast of that main cliff face that's catching the sun. Mix obviously more burnt. I'm still using the same colors, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna for my shadow, and using a bit of dry brush there to create some rock textures, gently scraping it over the surface of the paper, building up some tone and rhythm, and then I'm adding some shadows into the base of the cliff to create the illusion of rocks. And all I have to do is make random little marks on the left side of what I want to be a rock. Our brain will fill in all the gaps and read this as a rocky surface. Vary some of the shapes, have a few bigger rocks, a few smaller rocks there, and also scratching out just a few highlights. Fingernails are great tools to create organic textures in rocks, also for trees. You'll see me do that a lot. And just a tiny bit of shadow underneath the waves, just to enhance the three-dimensionality. And just a bit of texture on the grass on top of the cliff as well. And a little bit of shadow. And I hope you agree that the value difference between that right side and the left side of the ocean is a bit too big. I wanted to create some variation in the ocean closer to the cliffs, but it doesn't read quite right, so I'm glazing over that right side. I'm making sure I don't end up with any harsh lines. Soften that transition. And once that's dry, I'm just adding a few final splatters with titanium white, because that is the focal point of the painting there. I want to add maximum details. And a few birds to add a bit of life to this landscape, and we're done. I hope this inspires you to pick one of your reference photos and paint it in a very different light. And as always, your likes and comments mean a lot to me. Thank you.